academic freedom will be threatened by the proposed anti-terrorism law. No doubt
This
about it.
speaker is a graduate of the Institute of Accounts, Business and
Alumni
Finance.
office together with different volunteers with
many people from different parts of the world, and some of them have confirmed their attendance, and they are coming from the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and also in Australia. So, welcome.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the FEU Alumni Speakers Bureau webinar series. This is Eric John Visda from the Alumni Relations Office, and I will be your host for today. I know just like me, you are all excited for this session because just like our past webinar sessions, today's discussion will be incredibly informative, relevant, helpful, and inspiring. Now for today's topic, we are all aware that the magnitude of the coronavirus crisis brought extraordinary challenges to leaders around the globe. We have seen a lot of missed opportunities for decisive action and honest communication in a lot of the organizations. But what it really takes to be a leader in this challenging time? We are privileged to have this discussed by our speaker for today. Now, without further ado, may I call on the Director of the Alumni Relations Office, Mr. Selmer L. Santos, to moderate the rest of the program and formally introduce to you our speaker.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 8th Alumni Speakers Bureau webinar series. We are fortunate to have an internationally recognized expert in leadership development and a sought-after speaker. He graduated from Far Eastern University, obtaining his Bachelor of Science Industrial Psychology degree as summa cum laude. He is a co-founder of the XF1 PTE Limited. He also has gained corporate powers by being a regional director for human resources and talent management of Becton Dickinson Asia Pacific, to name one. Apart from his corporate practices, our speaker has two advocacies that he jointly undertakes with his wife and fellow alumni, Rodora Palomar Fresnedi. One is the Leadership Journey Institute, and the other one is the Project Disabilities, in which they accordingly founded the Sunshine Farm Philippines. The vision of Mr. Fresnedi is to develop world-class Filipino leaders who are not only technically competent, but also have the courage and integrity to lead. He would like to inspire and serve as a catalyst for the development of moral and inclusive leadership in our country and across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker, Mr. Romeo Fresnedi Jr. Hi, Sir Jojo. Good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you, Selmer. Am I ready now?
Yeah.
So, good afternoon, everyone. And for those in the US and Canada, good morning. Thank you for staying up late. Thank you, FEU, for organizing this webinar. Thank you, Selmer and Eric, for inviting me. This morning, I received a number of messages from friends, Filipinos, reminding me that today is September 1, 2020. And being Filipinos, Christmas begins. So Merry Christmas, everybody. Only in the Philippines. Yeah. My talk would come in three parts. Part one is a definition of leadership and some key leadership indicators. How do you see a good leader when you see one? Part two consists of my observations about how leadership is exercised or not during this pandemic. Part three is what leaders need to do to create a better normal. Okay. Three parts, four elements each. I would go rather quickly to conserve the time. I would like to add that I've been doing leadership development for over 30 years now. That gives you an indication of how old I am, but that's fine. I've been a trainer, a curriculum designer, a talent management director, a life coach, a speaker, and a leader myself many times over. I've lived and worked in Asia, the US, and Europe. In short, what I wanted to say is I've seen leadership work and I've seen it not work. Okay, Let me begin with part one. I'd like to start with a definition of leadership. Okay. I think this is important because leadership is like the proverbial tale of the elephant and the six blind men. Every year, more than 100 books on leadership come out because each author is just looking at a specific part of leadership, like the blind man with the elephant. One handles the trunk and say it's a snake, another handles the rope, and the tail and says it's a rope, another touches the pillar and says it's the leg rather, and says it's the pillar. So getting on the same page, I think, is very important. So my definition of leadership is it's mobilizing people for a common purpose to make a positive difference. Let's unpack that definition. Mobilizing people, moving people, rallying, summoning, calling to arms, compelling people to move. There is an anecdote in ancient Rome. The orator Cicero and the general Julius Caesar. They say when Cicero spoke, the audience applauded. But when Caesar spoke, the people marched. A common purpose. That means the greater good for the greater majority as opposed to personal interest and ambitions. A positive difference. The growth of people and society and the stewardship of the future. I want to address right at the start questions like, is a man like Hitler or any other favorite tyrant of yours a leader? He certainly mobilized people. He had a common purpose, his purpose and that of his cronies, and most certainly not a positive difference. For me, a good leader has to have those three elements. To inhabit that definition, a leader needs to remember four following things, and these are the leadership indicators. Leadership is about creating new realities. It's about giving birth to something that did not exist before. If the task is mainly to keep things going, you need less leadership. Don't get me wrong. Maintenance is important. In fact, that's how excellence is sustained. But that's management. That's managing and not exactly leadership. Managing is about planning, organizing, and controlling. Leading is about envisioning, aligning, and empowering. Leadership, in short, is about change. Second indicator, leadership is about action. There's a beautiful saying in Papua New Guinea, knowledge is only a rumor unless it lives in the muscle. Leadership is less about delivering speeches, posting tweets, writing blogs. They help. You need those to communicate. But at the end of the day, the true measure of leadership is results on the ground. Did you deliver? Okay. Third indicator, leadership is about four tasks. I say this because there's 1,001 leadership models and sets of leadership competencies, but they actually boil down to four things that the leader does. I would also like to add that different leadership or leaders come in different forms and shapes and styles and so forth. But at the end of the day, there are four things that leaders do. I get this from Warren Bennis. Number one, a leader sets direction. Call it vision, strategy, or goal, but that's the number one requirement for a leader. Number two, the leader delivers results on those directions. Number three, a leader develops people. People grow under leadership, especially developing more leaders. Lastly, a leader creates a healthy environment, one suspended the NBA season. Note, the following month would have been the playoffs. The most revenues that they earn come during that season. It caught everyone by surprise and caused a ripple effect. The biggest sports event during the summer, the NCAA's March Madness, was also suspended, as did the National Hockey League and the Major League Baseball, all summer events. With the situation largely uncertain, the smart move seemed to be to delay action until things become clearer. Why risk billions of dollars? But Adam Silver reasoned, by the time the dimensions of the threat are clear, you're badly behind in trying to control the crisis. And he was right. The Prime Minister of New Zealand acted similarly. On March 21st, she delivered an 8-minute televised statement announcing a 4-level COVID alert system. New Zealand had a 5-level alert system for disasters. So this is something not uncommon for them. She set clear guidelines for how her government would step up its response and what would be asked of citizens as the infection rates grew. When New Zealand had only 52 confirmed cases, the alert level was set at number 2, restricting some travel and urging people to limit contact. When the cases grew to 205 4 days later, Ardern raised the alert level to number 4, triggering a nationwide lockdown. New Zealand's number of cases fell over time, and for about 102 days, they had 0 cases. The Washington Post reported, New Zealand isn't just flattening the curve, it's squashing it. Of course, over time, after 102 days, 4 cases sprang up again in Auckland. Ardern ordered the lockdown, and last night, they opened Auckland again. For crises like COVID-19, acting with urgency is mission critical. Catch it while transmission is still small. Once it's widespread, you're under its mercy. Now, contrast that to Donald Trump's response. While he boasted about closing travels from China early, the US didn't do much afterwards. No national testing plans, no contact tracing, no isolation. Imagine the richest country in the world experiencing shortage of supplies like PPEs, test kits, and cotton swabs. Wearing masks has become very politicized. Contrast Silver and Ardern's actions to a certain Department of Health secretary who, when asked by a senator about temporarily banning travelers from China, replied, "Certainly, that's one of the possible options we're looking at, but not at this moment. The reason being, Your Honor, is we have to be very careful also of the possible repercussions of doing this. We need a doctor, not another politician. Our country did impose a travel ban, but it was too late. The train has left the station, so to speak." Critical behavior number 2, communicate with transparency. Communicating bad news is a thankless task. Leaders who will go ahead and risk demoralizing citizens, employees, customers, stockholders suffer certain consequences. In other words, bad news is bad for the popularity of the leader. And it takes wisdom and courage to understand that communicating with transparency mitigates risk. The quarantine being what it is, it gave me an opportunity to reread some old books. And one of them is The Plague by Albert Camus. It's been gathering dust in my bookshelf, but I had the chance to read it again. Amazing. The book was written in 1947 about a town named Oran in Algeria, and it looks like it was written for COVID-19. The same reaction from government officials, the downplaying of the situation, the hoping that would go away, the panic of the people eventually, and so forth and so on. And communicating with no transparency at all. The instinct is to downplay the threat rather, and withhold bad news. Again, Donald Trump, he is masterful at doing this. He said things like, we have only 15 cases. It will go down soon until it's 0. It will disappear in April when the weather gets warmer. We have things under control. We're doing great, he said. We've done more testing than anyone in the world. When finally confronted with over 170 deaths, they have 183 now plus, he said, people die. It is what it is. Amazing and amazingly callous. But go to YouTube and watch Prime Minister Lee of Singapore. Watch him conduct his public briefings, and I tell you, you won't die of COVID-19, but you will die of envy. In a clear, coherent manner, in the languages of Singaporean citizens, Prime Minister Lee switches from English to Cantonese to Malay and back to English. Prime Minister Lee laid down the facts of the case. How many cases? Where is it erupting? What are the causes? How much contact tracing has been done? And the action plan that needed to be taken. He always ended with a note that with the usual Singaporean discipline, which is legendary, the country could overcome the crisis. By the way, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand ended all her briefings with the words, the enemy is the virus, not the person who contracted the virus. Always be brave, always be kind. If you watched the video earlier, the watchword for FEU is be brave. Another good example of communicating with transparency is Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York. Blunt, even abrasive in the way New Yorkers are used to, Governor Cuomo's daily briefings were honest and accurate descriptions of reality as clearly as possible. He told people what to anticipate and what the developments mean to them. From being the global epicenter of COVID-19, the highest number of cases, the highest number of deaths, New York has been doing relatively well. Our own Vice President, Leni Robredo, constantly working to provide PPEs, food, and other necessities to frontliners, hospitals, and communities all over the country, is also proving to be an excellent communicator. Her short speech after the State of the Nation address was more SONA-like than the one we heard in Batasang Pambansa. Her address on August 24 contained more recommendations for COVID-19, the state of the economy, health for the community, the frontliners, and other urgent issues. But most importantly, she is inspiring hope in a time of despair. Hope plus resolve. She always ends with the words, kaya natin to. We can do this. Critical behavior number 3, responding effectively to missteps or mistakes. COVID-19 and the crisis it brought is new and complicated. Problems and mistakes would happen regardless of how well a leader acts. Show me a leader who hasn't committed mistakes, and I'll show you a leader who hasn't tried hard enough. How leaders respond to unavoidable mistakes and unexpected challenges are just as important as how they first address the crisis. Now, the instinct here is to double down, to explain one's actions and blame others. When Donald Trump was asked about his administration's responsibility for the growing crisis, he replied, "I take no responsibility." Then his government pushed all the actions to governors and mayors. Sounds familiar? When he suggested disinfecting or injecting disinfectants to fight the virus and was roundly criticized for it, he canceled all the briefings. He brought them back and used them to double down on his claims that everything was under control. Yeah, right. Today, the US has over 6 million cases. The US has 1/4 the population, has 4% the population of the world, but 1/4 of the COVID cases around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, to date has over 183,000 deaths. Contrast that also to Governor Gavin Newsom of California, who seemed to have had COVID-19 under control in the beginning and decided to open early. Well, COVID-19 struck. It's like COVID-19 was saying, "I'm here, you know. I haven't gone away." Ask what happened. Newsom and Mayor Garcetti of LA admitted they miscalculated and quickly ordered corrective measures. South Korea did the same. It flattened its curve. Then a major surge began. Surge brought about by people going to the bars and the churches opening without safety measures. But Korea got hold of itself again and ordered major measures. Fourth, critical behavior. Constant updating. I have participated in many change initiatives, and I have advised my client leaders, continue the briefings even if you sound like a broken record. Remember, people are under stress. They are scared. They feel they've lost control. Under this situation, it's difficult for them to absorb your message. You have to repeat yourself many times over. The problem is, if they don't get you, people create messages of their own. And the grapevine is very powerful. The instinct here is to stay the course and be inflexible. I have heard leaders say, "But I've given them the plan."
Thank you so much, Sir Jojo. That was a informative and inspiring talk about leadership in the better normal. No? My first question is, you mentioned about the resignation of Prime Minister Abe. How important it is for a leader to be aware of his limitation?
Very critical, Selmer. Okay. This thing called emotional intelligence consists of several components. The first component is self-awareness. Okay. Second component is awareness of others. The third component is awareness of how you affect others. And the third component is awareness of how others affect you. But the primary one is self-awareness. You should be aware of your strengths. You should be aware of your weaknesses. You should be aware of when your continued service, as loyal and as gallant as you'd like to provide it, no longer serves its usual purpose. It's the utmost humility when a leader like Shinzo Abe steps down because he's worried he's no longer giving his best to the country. So yes, it's very critical.
Yeah, that's true. I've read a lot of comments about Prime Minister Abe. No? It turns out that he was admired more because of his actions, no, by admitting his limitations. No? Because the normal course is when you admit your limitations, you deem to be considered as weak. In his case, it's a very different thing. A lot of people actually admired him for what he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Person who is afraid to admit his weakness is a weak person.
And as a leader, sir, should you practice transparency all the time?
That's a good question. Okay. As a matter of principle, yes. Okay. It's a matter of timing.
Okay.
It's a matter of framing.
Mhm.
Okay. With the proper framing, you can actually be transparent. Okay. It's how you deliver the message. Congratulating everybody for the monumental victory. Okay. The other letter, a shorter one, is apologizing and taking on all the responsibility for the disaster. Okay. And he was ready to come out, whatever happens. Okay. Um, Along with transparency is the courage to accept accountability. Okay. That you're responsible for what happened and you're willing to own up. Okay. They go hand in hand, transparency and accountability.
You talked about the anti-terror bill earlier, and actually we had a talk about anti-terror bill about 2 months ago, which now passed by the Congress. No? Can you consider fear or the ability to create fear among people an essential component of leadership?
Again, a good question. No. Okay. Fear works only in the beginning. Okay. Afterwards, it wears off easily. Okay. Fear is immobilizing. Okay. Fear stops you from action. Fear creates distrust. If you need to go to the next level, you need trust, you need empowerment, okay? You need a certain psychological safety. Okay. When fear is high, people speculate. They create rumors on their own. Okay. It divides people. Okay? It wears down people.
A question from one of our attendees. As a leader, how do you handle the pressure inside and outside of your circle? I think this is a very important question.
Yeah. Okay. If you have a clear sense of purpose, okay, and you know where you stand and you know who your friends are, okay, you will have the courage to go on no matter what. And that's how you can withstand the pressure from within and from without. There's a famous anecdote about Joan of Arc, okay, Saint Joan of Arc, okay, virtually a teenager, a woman, medieval ages, in a world filled with men wanting to lead the army. She was told no one would follow you. And Joan of Arc said, I won't even look behind to see who's following me. Okay. And her fearlessness inspired the army of men and followed her to victory. She was clear about her goal, about her purpose. She's also empowered by the faith that God spoke to her and gave her a mission, and she's going to do it whether she lives or die.
Given our experiences in this pandemic, what do you think are the additional competencies a leader should have for a better normal?
Yeah. Okay. I mentioned a few. Okay. Acting with urgency, communicating with transparency, constant updating, tweaking your mistakes. You know, I mentioned a few things you should focus on. Okay. In terms of competency, and this is particularly true for any new situation, you got to have learning agility. Okay. The ability to learn fast, the ability to size up the situation, what it requires, and to identify the people who can help you. Okay. It doesn't mean you need to know everything. Okay. What it requires is the ability to ask the right questions. Okay. You don't need to know all the answers, but if you have the ability to ask all the right answers, all the right questions, rather, you'll find people who's willing to help you with the answers. That's number one, learning agility. The second one is emotional intelligence, as I mentioned to you. This is required, important to help you work with people, to help you sense where their fears and motivations are, what makes them tick, what makes them moving. It also helps you sense who's going to work well with others and who's going to bring down the group. Learning agility, emotional intelligence, and then the virtues I mentioned to you. For us in particular, let's not forget our sense of kapwa, our sense of love, our malasakit, and our delicadeza.
Since you mentioned about your talk being a family affair, there's one question here from our audience. How do you adjust with a pandemic when it comes to leadership and family-related matters?
Yeah. The leader in our family is my wife. Well, we're all supporters. Yeah. Our 3 kids are in the US. Okay. And we are physically apart, but we're not socially distant. Social distancing is a rather unfortunate term, which the World Health Organization acknowledged. They want to use the term physical distancing. So, constant communication is very important. Okay, may not be face-to-face communication, but there are many ways: FaceTime, FB Messenger, these MS Teams, Zoom meetings, and so forth. So there's no excuse for not getting in touch. Not to mention the usual text messages and so forth. So, how do we adjust to family affairs? We speak almost daily. Our children calls us, and of course, my wife had been together since the quarantine. Yeah, and even before the quarantine. Yeah. We've been like that for 43 years. Yeah. Leadership outside. Um, my high school classmates and I have Zoom meetings. In fact, tomorrow we have one. We're trying to explore possibilities of securing laptops for high school students in our former high school. We've held several Zoom meetings, raised funds for PPE, food for frontliners, and other donations that we've done. So there is no excuse actually, because technology is providing you with alternative ways.
Another question from one of our audience. How do you think you can practice or show compassion? And what is the implication of a leader who show no compassion to his neighbor? Or should we say to the people under their accountability?
What is compassion? Okay. It comes from the word com, meaning with, passion, meaning suffering.
Yes.
So compassion literally means to suffer with others. Okay. So for a leader, ways of expressing compassion could be expressing an understanding of the difficulties that your employees are undergoing right now. Okay. Concern about family health and safety, concern about the possibility of losing his or her job, difficulties with online productivity, and the like. Okay. This is the time, as I mentioned earlier, to be a little more flexible and cut people some slack, because everybody is trying to learn the new normal, so to speak. Mistakes will happen. So this is not the time to lose patience. This is not the time to start scolding others. Okay. This is the extra time where you need to ask, how's your family? How are your kids? How do you get to the office? Or how's your Wi-Fi at home? Okay. This is the time to ask a little more personal questions than you've been doing, and to check in how people are alike. Leaders who haven't shown compassion, their leaders or their bosses should be aware and should monitor them as well about how they're taking care of their employees.
Yeah. And for our final question, so what is the best or most effective leadership style for you?
Okay. I don't have any. Okay. That is why I didn't give you a leadership style. I didn't give you a leadership model, and so forth. It's again, if you're clear about your purpose, if you're clear about your values, your style will get you, will work for you. I've seen so many leaders, different shapes and sizes, different styles, some blunt, some kind, and so forth. Here's one last learning for leaders. Okay, people complain about a tough leader. Okay, people complain about the tough boss. Okay, as distinguished from a bad boss. Huh? Okay, I'm talking about someone whose standards are high, somebody who will push you, someone who will correct you, someone who will challenge you. That's a tough boss. Okay, here's a truism. People prefer to work for a tough boss where something is happening versus a very nice boss and there's nothing happening. Okay? People prefer that. Yeah. So in the end, and at the end of the day, it's delivering something that makes a difference to the person and the group and the customers and society as a whole, which matters.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sir Jojo. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and hope to see you again in our next webinar session.
Thank you very much.